night may be long and the dark may be deep, but the answers are there to be found. Whether it's the normal, the abnormal, or the paranormal, you're in the right place. Let's go beyond reality.
Welcome to the show. Tonight is going to be one of those nights, and when I say one of those nights, I mean one of those nights where my brain has trouble keeping up with the guests. Well, I say already having trouble. Guest, it's one guest. Mark Fiorentino will be with us. Mark has been on the program before. He's written a book. The book is called Master of Reality, and basically Mark shares his views on how the universe really works based on his study and research of Einstein's unified field theory. So already I'm lost. But he's going to be discussing how Einstein's theory can be used to travel through space, how it can be used to create renewable energy, also future technology, some of the things we've seen on Star Trek and other sci-fi television programs and movies. He'll also talk about the connection to conspiracy theories that include UFOs and alien technology that they use and maybe the government uses, and other controversial topics such as how it relates to near-death experiences. All of it related to the theory of superrelativity. So that's going to be our discussion tonight. I'm already concerned that I'm going to have a headache by the end of it just because these concepts are huge. It's whenever you start talking about that level of physics, that level of the universe, I have a tough time getting my brain around it. I'm sure the audience has much easier time than I do, but I'm just admitting up front that this stuff it confounds me. So it'll be interesting to talk about it with Mark. He puts it in terms that'll make it very, very understandable and relatable. And again, having him on the show before, I remember the discussion. I remember how interesting it is. So it's going to be a great time, as always, and looking forward to that. There was something I wanted to bring up, and I don't remember what it was now. See what happens? This is why I can't get my brain around physics. I can't even remember what I was going to talk about. There was some stuff that was important, too. Oh, well. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe to the channels, YouTube, Twitch, primarily, and also the podcast version of the show. If you've been a Twitch subscriber in the past and you haven't been over there recently, I encourage you to jump on and refresh that subscription. Most people use their Amazon Prime account to link it. That way there's no subscription fee, and if you could do that, I appreciate it. We have a number of great followers on Twitch, but the subscription numbers, they ebb and flow, so we're trying to get those numbers up. Twitch is our backup. As you know, we've had problems with YouTube, not just with what they're doing, but just occasionally these platforms have their own technical problems, and we have to use backup broadcast options. Twitch is ours for this program. And, of course, the podcast is always a great way to do it as well. Let's see. No, I wasn't going to talk about Scaricon breaking. I don't remember what it was, but it was very, very important, obviously. Very, very important. It'll come to me at some point, and I'll be reminded to talk about it. We do have some great programs coming up. John Russell, you remember John? I've had John on a bunch of different stuff. He always has some great things to talk about as it relates to ghosts and his work as a psychic medium. He was also on the Paranormal Roadhogs program that we did. By the way, if you're into bikes and the paranormal, you might want to check that out on Facebook, Paranormal Roadhogs. There's no regular schedule of programming for that yet. But hopefully in the future we can do that. As you know, I'm working on many shows, many projects. So often the priorities get shuffled around a little bit. Pretty soon I'm going to be streaming 20 hours a day, every 7 days a week. That seems where we're headed here. Britt and I are talking about very, very soon putting the Independence Gang on 5 days a week, not 7, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and then also adding the Murder at Midnight program that we talked about on the Independence Gang, which will follow the Independence Gang. It'll be a show that'll be on the Independence Gang channel. It'll be the Independence Gang presents Murder at Midnight, and we'll present information on cases that are either ongoing and unsolved, like the Gabby Petito case, or maybe some cases from the past that have updates, new information, or just some maybe classic unsolved cases. There are several of those kicking around that people still talk about, depending on what's in the news. So that's what's happening. A lot of things going on. No shortage of projects, that's for sure. And I certainly appreciate it. I know that when I start a new show or we do something new on whatever channel it happens to be. So many of you who have supported me here on Beyond Reality make the switch over to that program and support me there, and whoever I have with me there as well. And thank you so much for doing that. I really, really do appreciate it. And it's really heartwarming to see so many of those names show up in multiple chat rooms for multiple programs. So thanks so much for doing that. Okay, so let's go to break and let's get our guest on the phone so we can start talking about this stuff. Again, I'm going to have to ask him to speak slowly for me, so I hope that doesn't bother you. But we will be talking about some great things tonight with Mark Fiorentino. That's coming up right here on Beyond Reality.
Hey, it's JV here. You know I've asked for your support in the past, and I'm going to do it again because it's really, really important. And there are a couple of ways you can support the show, and it's so inexpensive. Now, you can go to Patreon, and you can become a Patreon supporter, and we really, really encourage that. But there's also another way. If you look at the description of the podcast, if you're a podcast listener, and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a way to support the show directly through the podcast app. And it's only 99 cents a month. It's less than $1. You probably have that change in your couch right now. That $1 a month, less than $1, goes a long way in helping us produce this program, provide great interviews for you during the course of the week. I thank you in advance because the support is so important to the program.
Thanks for being here, everyone. I want to remind you once more time that the podcast version of the show is available on all major podcast platforms. You can find it just about anywhere you find your podcast. The show is called Beyond Reality Paranormal on the podcast platforms. And I encourage you to subscribe to that as well. The nice thing about the podcast platforms is that it downloads automatically to your podcast app on your phone or your other device, and that way it's always available for you if you're interested in listening to the show. Maybe you missed one, you want to catch up, that's right there for you. And it's in a nice, easy to listen to package. So again, thank you to everyone who's already subscribed, and I encourage you to do that as well. We have about 10,000 downloads of the program a day in the podcast form, so it's really, really exciting. And again, one of the reasons we have so many people listening to the program, whether it's the live stream or the podcast version of the show, is because we have terrific guests. Like our returning guest tonight, Mark Fiorentino. Mark has been obsessed with Einstein's unified field theory ever since hearing about it as a child. He's worked for many years in the high-tech industry, including for IBM. He's written about this, he's studied it, he's researched it, and he does a great job of explaining it to in layman's terms, which is the only way I would possibly understand it. Mark, welcome back to the program. So great to have you on again.
Oh, thank you for having me back on.
So you're still at this. You're still researching. You're still exploring the depths of these ideas, and you're still coming up with new answers and new ideas.
Yes, that's correct. I just completed a paper that I worked on for 6 months, which is basically the scientific paper that explains my theory with the math. So it's about 50 pages long. I uploaded it to ResearchGate, so that now I have the backing of the scientific paper that describes my model, the unified field theory model, which basically combines electromagnetism and gravity with the single fundamental field. And it's all merged now, and it's official with the mathematics. So I completed that just a few weeks ago and presented to Anti-Gravity Conference to help them and propose an experiment to perform that can prove anti-gravity.
So when you do something like that, Mark, and again, forgive my layman's view of all this, but when you do something like that and you submit a paper like that, is that the type of thing that fellow physicists and other scientists would take a look at and do the quote unquote peer review kind of thing to test your ideas?
Well, that's as close as I can get. Yes, there are scientists that go to ResearchGate and conduct review and in fact read the paper. I get notified every time somebody reads the paper. This is the only shot I have really at getting, because most journals they just won't accept your documents if you're not degreed in physics,
right?
And you have to have the preferred type of subject, like either quantum mechanics related or string theory related. When you go into classical field theory and that kind of stuff, they start to limit that as being something they'll accept. So this was the only way in the circumstance that I'm in that I could submit that paper for scientists to read.
Is that exciting for you? I mean, you must get a tremendous amount of satisfaction after you do all this work and you're able to put it together in paper form where people can actually read it and try to get a grasp on your ideas, maybe even comment and provide you some feedback. That must be genuinely satisfying.
It's good to get it out there because it's something I needed to do. It's one thing to write the book, and I put a basic equation in there that I used to build the system or set of equations that I used in my paper to solve the mass for the neutron. That's really, what needed to be done to demonstrate the model. If you could compute the mass, not using quantum mechanics, not at all, no probabilities were necessary. I just used it with my model, which basically says that gravity is caused by accelerated motion of fundamental unbalanced charges. So I put those charges into motion with these formulas, and it generated the mass, the exact mass that the neutron makes. And it can be used for the proton, and I have solved for the proton as well, or any particle that has mass.
It's quite extraordinary to hear you talk about this, and it's really basically brings us down. It digs us into the fundamental building blocks of everything, everything, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about when we start peeling away these layers of the onion.
Yeah, the universe starts out very simple. There's only one thing that exists. That thing is space, or the fundamental field, which they called the ether back in the early 1900s. And that's all there is. Everything is made from that. Everything else, all the particles are nothing more than convolutions of space, which is basically what Einstein did. It was said that, indeed, one might say that Einstein wanted to build matter out of nothing but convolutions of space-time. In the process, he used all sorts of mathematical devices, but constantly searched for others. I did the same thing. I found the device, the equations that will do that job. And the irony is they've been around for centuries, all the way back to Newton's time. I just modified them going from the large scale to the small scale so that we could calculate the mass of particles. So that's all that needed to be done, and it's actually very simple.
It's easy to hear you say that.
Well, from the perspective of a physicist, this is like astonishing simple. The one physicist that I sent it to so far, he couldn't believe it. He didn't refute the math. He just simply couldn't believe that I could get the mass from nothing but particles in motion relative to space. It's taught in physics, but it's taught in such a way that don't believe that. That's an old school theory, from Einstein. Don't believe that you can make mass that way. So he was in shock when he tried to talk himself out of it. And that was interesting to get that point of view and see how he reacted because, most of our physicists are quantum mechanics people or worse yet, string theory. And it's just so far from their thinking, it staggers them. And I think I'm going to get some more of that along the way here. But somehow, some way, I'm going to have to make a breakthrough in that realm, hopefully. Otherwise, this will fall into to the cracks, and it could be decades or maybe even centuries before somebody stumbles over this again. I mean, I hope I can pull this off and get this known to mainstream physics. All I can do is do these shows and keep trying to get the message out there, but it's tricky business.
Yeah,
I'm in a strange circumstance.
It is tricky, but you do a great job of communicating, and I think that given the fact that your path has to be through communication and talking, as you said, on shows like this, you're doing a great job of that. I want to just because it's so fundamental to everything we're going to be talking about here. When you say space and you say the ether, when I hear the word space, I think of absolute nothingness. It's almost hard to think of a void, but it's a void. And is that what you mean when we talk about space?
Yeah, most physicists, there's a big argument. I remember asking an astronomer who was giving a lecture at the college that I lived near. I asked him, what is space? And he just looked around and he got this smile on his face and said, we don't know. I respect that answer. But most physicists will say, just like you said, it's a void, it's empty, it's nothing. And nothing could be further from the truth than that. Space is a real thing. It's the only thing. It's a substance. And I describe it in extreme detail in my book to make that point. And in the paper, I spend the first 45 or so pages breaking down, proving the ether exists, proving space is a physical object. It's a quasi-elastic solid. And everything comes from that. And so, to me, space, even though it is like a void, it doesn't have any particles or an atmosphere or anything like that in it. It's a thing, a simple thing, a quasi-elastic solid, which basically, quasi meaning if you put a force to it, like a magnetic field out in the middle of space, and you hold the magnetic field out there, it will cause space to bend according to that magnetic force. When you remove that force, the space snaps back to its flat Euclidean form. So that's the quasi part. Elastic means it moves only in small increments, this way or that, as it's bent. And solid, when I mean solid, I mean something in its strictest terms, definition, that which is continuous. That's it. Don't think of solid like metal or steel or wood. It just means something that is continuous. It's not made up of any parts. That's what space is. I'm strapped here down with words that I have to use to describe something that's invisible.
Yeah.
We'll never be able to see it unless we go into the spiritual realm, where we have total consciousness. But here, I'm stuck with using words and these communication devices in order to describe this thing that's a black box that cannot be seen.
Is it, to try to put it in simple terms for me, imagine we didn't understand what water was and we were floating in the ocean, submerged in the ocean. We're surrounded by all this, so we didn't know. We can see through it. We can, whatever. We might not necessarily be aware that it's all around us. Is that kind of a way to envision it?
Well, there are additional things that I use to know that you're in it, like you're saying with the ocean example. That's a good example. Well, first of all, particles go through this space, photon light particles, electrons, everything from the sun. They all travel through it, and they are all transverse waves. And Einstein said, you can only have transverse waves in a solid. So there's evidence there. If you understand that and you take it to heart, since transverse waves are traveling through this thing we call space, whatever it is, it's a solid. And then space has properties. So this is another clue, a tip-off. It has the properties of permeability and permittivity, which have to do with the way electrostatic fields and magnetic fields propagate through space. And it's immeasurable properties. So if that thing were truly made of nothing, absolutely nothing at all, you wouldn't have the measurable properties of permeability and permittivity, yet they're there and measurable. I can go out into deep space away from nothing and measure those things, and it will have that. So there's more indications that this thing is a something. And perhaps the greatest piece of evidence of all of how you know there's something there, if you accelerate when you're in outer space, away from gravity, away from planets, and you're just floating, and all of a sudden you hit the gas and accelerate, you will be pulled back into your chair, and you will feel inertia. Inertia comes and exists because you're accelerating relative to space. And so there's more evidence there. That's the kind of matches your ocean example. You get a feel for that there's something there, and something that your body and the particles in your body are reacting with when they accelerate. This is all rock-solid evidence that space is a something. And this has been kind of shoved under the rug with modern-day physicists who want to say everything is, abstract and random and not real unless you observe it. This is saying that we're dealing with a real substance, and we're going to study. I studied it as a metaphysician. I studied the nature of things, and I studied the nature of space.
Mark, you started this quest, this curiosity, with an introduction to Einstein's work as a child. And already tonight, you've obviously mentioned Einstein and his work several times as a foundation for the things we're talking about and the work that you have done. How instrumental, and I know this is probably, there's you could probably no way to overstate how instrumental, but how instrumental is Einstein's work? There have been some critics recently that have said he was wrong on a number of things. Yet at the same time, did Einstein realize the full implications of this work as you obviously extract more realities from the work, and other scientists have as well?
Yes, he understood nature and reality. In my opinion, he was, like me, a true metaphysician. And he was dealing with reality as he believed it really is and really exists. And he knew it better than anybody. He is the expert, and 90+% of what I got comes from him. I just continued following the path and accumulated the rest of the evidence and information and made links, like the equivalence principle. I solved what that really means. In Einstein's day, there was the equivalence principle. It basically said accelerated motion in the absence of a gravitational field is indistinguishable from unaccelerated motion in the presence of a gravitational field. That was just, why? Why are they the same? And in my book and in the paper, I describe inertia and I describe mass and gravity all coming about as a contraction of space, a physical contraction. And Einstein knew about it because he read about something called the Ehrenfest paradox, which he got very excited about when he saw what Ehrenfest and really Max Born said before him about this mechanical method for how something could generate mass. When he saw that, he wrote like 4 or 5 more papers on it. But I don't think anybody really grasped this paradox and the incredibly powerful meaning of what it's stating, because from that paradox, that example, he got the idea for general relativity and how to bend space. A gravitational field is, according to superrelativity, is nothing more than a contraction of space. So I get a lot from Einstein, and I want to honor his memory every chance I get. Even the name of my theory, superrelativity, is to honor the memory of Albert Einstein.
You mentioned earlier when we were talking about what space is, what is space? We know something's there, but we don't know quite what it is. But you said when we're in the spiritual realm, and I might be misquoting you a little bit, but when we're in the spiritual realm, we will know because we'll have full and complete understanding. Or talk about that a little bit more. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, along with studying mainstream science and history, Newton and Faraday and Maxwell and all those guys, I also studied many, many, many near-death experiences, looking for more evidence, looking for a greater understanding. Why would I do that? What's the theory behind that? I got the idea actually from Einstein, who said this: I want to know how God created this world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomena, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. So I thought about that, and I said, well, if I want to know how this universe works, the best thing to do is go to the person that created this thing and ask him myself. Now, normally, the only way to do that, since in my theory it's intelligent design theory, so the creator, God, created the universe, I would have to die in order to ask him. But instead of doing that, I went to people that did die and had a near-death experience and looked for information. And I figured if God wanted to get the information to us, it would come through some of these people, and I did find evidence there. So what I'm basically saying is, if you want to know how something works, go to the person that created that something and ask them. That was my purpose in going through the NDEs, since when they get to the other side, they're connected to that matrix, that total consciousness. And it's described over and over again by many near-death people. So there's a connection, and anything you want to know, you just ask it, and it's answered. So there was information I got from the other side, very definitely, and I put that in the book. So our ordinary scientists would never dream of doing that.
Yeah.
Outside of their realm. And that puts them in a keyhole. And I went beyond it. Don't get me wrong, I love scientists, but I have to say science has its limitations. Scientists see their world in different ways, as each discipline sees the world in part, but not the whole. There are scientists that have spent their entire time here on Earth looking through a keyhole, the keyhole being the scientific method. They have spent their lives trying to widen that keyhole in order to see more and know more, and now I am attempting to widen that keyhole by explaining that our reality comes from the Creator, who is the source of everything. Many scientists will, upon hearing that the keyhole can be widened by ways they can't even imagine, will quickly reject the possibility. I accept that many will do this, but that's my philosophy, and I don't apologize for it. I want to get to the truth, and that's what I did.
Mark, I don't know if it's the nature of this program or if it's a general shifting of maybe an acceptance of these ideas, but I've heard other scientists talk the way you're talking, and make this connection between what we've known to be science and what we've known to be more of a spiritual world, and they're starting to say that science is actually starting to support the idea of not dispute these ideas, but actually support these ideas of afterlife and this, as you mentioned, greater consciousness, all of those things. Do you see that shift happening as well, or do you still feel like a bit of an island in this?
It is my intention to help that happen. As Einstein once said, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. It's time that they become merged again. And eventually, science will be subsumed by religion, since the Creator is the source of, all of this three-dimensional world is within God. There is nothing outside of God. Everything within this physical universe has to correspond to laws, and God set those laws. They are immutable as God is immutable. None of this, what we see and experience, is an accident. It is intentioned by God. And I say that in my book, that this particular thing that I'm talking about is through the power of intention. We're digging right down to the core of reality here to explain how things work. And I am happy to hear that you're hearing that there's some scientists. I have seen some too. They're not all atheists or agnostics or whatever. But yeah, I'm happy to hear that there's a trend where they're coming around. This is very important because that's the way it really is. When we get down to it, each one of us, when we pass away, within seconds of getting there, we know the truth. The darkness is over. And we understand things again, and that is the truth. So hopefully this trend that you notice continues. I sincerely hope so. I'm going to do my part to bring it about.
Let's talk about the beginning of it all then. We're taught in schools, I suppose. I mean, it's been a while since I've been in school, but we're taught of this idea that there was a single particle, this super particle that exploded. This is the Big Bang theory, if you will. And right. It created everything. What's your version of the creation based on what we've just talked about?
I definitely have a version there. I spend 3 chapters at the back of my book explaining the Big Bang. In my Big Bang theory, it all comes about due to, and this really reeks of intelligent design, it comes about from the particle called the neutron. the neutron has some very odd behavior. And if you're a believer in intelligent design, that odd behavior, it makes you ask a question. And here's the odd behavior. A neutron, if it's inside of an element where there's protons and other neutrons, that neutron is stable for practically eternity. But if you isolate the neutron out in space, just one by itself, within 15 minutes it decays into something, a proton and an electron. And that is like, gosh, it rocked me when I realized a proton and electron is hydrogen. Why did the designer make the neutron do this? There has to be a reason for it. You know, in quantum mechanics, it's a mystery. We don't know why it does that. But I say, if you look at it from the perspective of intelligent design, it suddenly makes sense. If, in fact, it does that, and there is going to be a moment in time when you can count on that there's going to be a load of neutrons out there somewhere, and that point is the Big Bang. So I'm saying that cosmic egg, what you call the particle, which was in reality a massive black hole that is millions of light years across inside, that contains all the matter and energy in the universe in a specific form, neutrons, neutronium. And when this thing lets go and cuts loose, out comes massive amounts of neutronium gas, or a plasma, along with neutronium spheres, which come into, they're the seeds, the cosmic seeds that start the new universe. So within 15 minutes, according to my theory, according to, atomic theory, the neutrons will all convert to hydrogen, just what the universe needs to build another universe again. You need lots of hydrogen to start the stars. So you got tons of hydrogen gas along with these tinier neutron spheres that didn't dissolve or become gaseous in that explosion. These neutron spheres go out and then they form the galaxies and the stars and the planets. So what I'm saying is our sun, inside, in the middle of it, has a solid core made of neutronium. That's how the gas was captured to form that star. You need a gravitational force. And I know this for sure because if you ask an astrophysicist how the star is created, they get a little fuzzy. Well, somehow the gas is combined and contracted into a star. There's no way hydrogen gas on its own is going to contract and form the pressure that, becomes a star, because the repulsive force of the electromagnetic field of the proton is orders of magnitude larger than the gravitational field that it emits. Therefore, it will stay separate in a gas out in outer space. It must have a gravitational force. So my theory, the cosmological theory, says that comes from neutronium, which came from the birth of the universe when the Big Bang happened. So I went, when I thought of all this, and I said to myself, let's find some evidence. Let's see if the sun has a solid core. And so I went and I looked around, and I searched, and I found some articles and an article talking about something called the tackle line. It's a measurement that NASA performed to see that, the gases around the sun, how they're moving. And they're moving at a speed that's actually slower. There's something inside of the sun that's spinning much more rapidly. And as you go down, you can see the gases are becoming one, and suddenly there's a drop-off, and all the lines converge, and if you see this chart, you'll know what I'm talking about, into a flat line, straight line, heading toward the core, which is indicating there's something solid there. I mean, really solid. And but nobody will come out and say, well, I bet you there's neutronium there. They just say, well, that's probably just real dense gas. There's no way gas on its own is going to achieve that density without help from a gravitational force. So there's evidence right there. But it's a matter of interpretation at this point. So that's basically my theory, very, shortened up. There's more details in there, but that's why it took 3 chapters to describe it. But that's the theory of the cosmology of the design of the universe.
Mark, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have witnessed the death of stars, through our telescopes. We have we witnessed the birth of stars?
You can see, yes, some stars when they call in nurseries that are glowing brightly, and what we would need to see is a star at the very beginning of birth, and we have seen some out there where there's something dark, dense, and there's just this little bit of glowing gas around it. This is just the beginning of a, so it could even be a black hole that creates a new star. And it surrounds itself. It's spinning rapidly, and that's important. That keeps the matter from falling directly onto the surface. It starts to rapidly rotate and spiral around the object and form an atmosphere, just like Earth has an atmosphere. It's rotating, and it has this mass. It holds the gases close to the surface of the Earth and has an atmosphere. The sun has a rock-solid, heavily powerful gravitational field being emitted by the neutronium core. And you bring up a good point. You said, when these supernovas happen and they blow out, what's left? A neutron star, a pulsar, which is a neutron star, or in some cases a black hole. All I'm saying is that explosion didn't cause that to be there. It was already there. And what happened is the pressure became so great as they started getting toward the heavier elements, the pressure blowing out overcame the gravitational pull of the thing that's holding that star together and blows away the atmosphere, revealing the sun source, which is the neutronium cores. And that's going to be discovered eventually. I'm predicting it now. I was the first, the only one that I know of to figure all that out. So that's a bold prediction I'm making, and I'm asking people to look into this, prove it. There's got to be more ways we can experiment with the sun and detect the neutronium core.
You talk about the sun source, and I know in some of the notes that I have here, you talk about aliens and angels referencing the sun source. When you use the word aliens and angels, are they in the form that we would recognize them as? Aliens as in other life forms, non-terrestrial life forms, and angels as in religious or spiritual angels?
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, angels are angels from the spirit realm, and, ET is some other life form from some other planet, some other species, whatever. Who are aware of this already. I mean, they are advanced, and they reference this by that name, sun source. So that to me is more evidence. The Earth, I firmly believe, in its core has a very small neutronium core, which gathered the initial gases, that hydrogen, which then the sun source does what it does. It compresses that hydrogen and makes it fuse into helium. And then it compresses the helium and it makes it fuse into the next element. And this keeps happening over millions of years until a crust forms. So you start out with a dim star, a planet like the Earth or Saturn or Jupiter or whatever, and eventually that system generates all of the elements in the periodic table, and sure enough, the Earth has them all. How did they get here?
Yeah,
we made them right here. And then, of course, when I said, "Oh my God, the Earth has a core too," I went to look for evidence. So I says, "Well, I know in fusion, when that process happens, neutrinos shoot from the fusion process." So I looked for somebody that pointed a neutrino detector at the center of the Earth. And I found somebody in Japan who had a neutron detector, and he pointed it at the center of the Earth. And guess what he found? Neutrons, neutrinos coming from the center of the Earth. More evidence. But will they say, "Oh, well, there's a fusion process there, maybe," or it could even be fission. But if it were fission, it would be very messy, and there would be a lot more radioactivity in the lava than there is. The lava is pretty clean, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So there's fusion more than likely happening, and it takes the sun source or a neutronium core to. And there's more evidence that I'm going to reveal in my second book that comes from the other side on this, because I asked the other side, and they confirmed that, yes, that's correct.
The other side being the spirit realm?
Yes.
Are you a psychic medium? Do you do that yourself, or do you use somebody else to do it?
No, I do not do that myself. I have... The next book is going to explain a lot of things about my history and how a lot of this was really predicted many years ago. And all along the way, at various times, I would have a chance to meet with a psychic or a medium. And occasionally, on a rare occasion, they would mention something, and then I would inquire more. At the end, toward the end of the book, I did have a chance to speak with a very good medium, Tamara Calder Richardson, the Southern Bell medium. And I had asked or talked to her because I was very concerned about something that happened to me that caused me to seek out a medium. Not this book. I wasn't really asking about the book or the theory at that time. I thought, it's right, it's pretty good, but I got this urgent issue, which I will explain fully in the book. I wanted to fully document everything was said and done so that people understand how I got there and how all this information came about. And it's startling information, but I want to document it fully, and I'm writing that second book right now. And it's like a prequel, basically, to this book and what's happened here, to acknowledge the fact that a lot of what I got comes from the spiritual realm, confirmation and cooperation with my ideas. So there's a lot of stuff to cover yet.
Yeah. Mark, I want to get into a couple kind of separate topics here. They relate to the conversation, but they're kind of standalones as well. You even mentioned anti-gravity. I think you said you spoke or you submitted the paper to an anti-gravity conference. Did I hear you right?
Yes.
Where do we stand with anti-gravity technology?
Well, I think, as many people do, I don't think this is a surprise, that the U.S. government has probably, since around 1947 or in that decade or in the early 1950s, reverse-engineered crashed UFOs and has that technology. And, I don't think that's a surprise to any. I think most people now believe that, and more so every day. They've classified that information, and they're not going to let it go because it gives, for two reasons, the worldwide panic that there's aliens, and more importantly, strategic military advantage that they get from having this technology, and maybe nobody else has it, I don't know. Maybe China has it, but I don't know. So where do we stand? Very well in that they have it, but they won't acknowledge it, so... And until the U.S. government acknowledges aliens and UFO technology, anti-gravity, and along with anti-gravity, once you master anti-gravity technology, you also, as a bonus, get faster than light speed space travel. When you create the slipwave field, part of the bonus there is that anti-gravity propulsion field enables the space to be biased in such a way that you can move through it faster than the speed of light. And that's completely necessary to get to other star systems.
Yeah.
Going at the speed of light is way too slow.
Yeah. If we have this technology, if they've reversed engineered it, have we ever seen, unwilling or unknowingly, its use, any applications that you can point to that we didn't recognize what was happening at the time?
The only thing that I could think of is how these Mars rovers keep getting repaired, and it stopped working, and then all of a sudden it starts working again.
Yeah.
or you see it and it's all dusty and dirty, and then 6 months later, it takes another picture of itself and it's spotless. How did that happen? There's no rain on the Mars. How did it get all clean again?
So are you suggesting they're using this technology?
I'm looking around looking for any kind of evidence. That's about the only thing I've seen. They're going to keep this. It's so important. It's the world's biggest secret. The idea that alien technology, aliens exist, is without a doubt the biggest event in the history of the Earth, and it's being kept from us. And my concern is we need the anti-gravity field, the slip wave technology, so that we can prepare for the day when we have to leave the Earth, which is going to come eventually. Maybe billions of years from now, or maybe a month from now. It depends on our circumstances. If there's a big asteroid heading toward us, if we don't have the space defense system that I describe in my book to repel it, we're going to be in big trouble. We need this to keep our society, our culture, our species alive. And as long as we don't have it, and we don't have these drones to repel, and we don't have the ability to leave the planet if there's some great natural catastrophe, we're in jeopardy. We can be wiped out. At some point, we got to just say we need to release this and allow the world to develop this technology so that everyone, if we have to escape this planet, can get off when the time comes.
It's happened before. The scenario you just described is one of many possible scenarios where a significant asteroid hits the Earth and makes it uninhabitable. It's happened before. So that's certainly not far-fetched by any means. Let's say it happens in a month. Let's say we identify something heading this way in a month. It's going to be here in a year. And let's say we do have the technology to get off the Earth. Where would we go? Do we know where to go?
That's why we have to have this technology. I will bet you that we've already done what I'm about to say. Sent out probes that are moving tens of thousands of times faster than the speed of light to all the nearby stars. The probe's mission is to go into the atmosphere, measure the atmosphere, take pictures. Is there life there? Can it support life? So we know we got an exit point that we can go to, one or more, preferably more than one, that we can go in an emergency and colonize. And then after that, you start sending missions there. The Space Force, that's probably the stuff that it's doing right now. Hopefully it's not trying to find other aliens to battle with.
Yeah.
The last thing we need to do is start more wars out in outer space.
Yeah.
Let's try, making peace this time and negotiating and no more manifest destiny. Let's just, if there's something there, we should ask permission before we colonize. But every planet has to have this system set up. Sooner or later, a disease is going to spread. Our core is unstable. The Earth's core is very unstable. Look at the geographic websites and the geodesic displays. And the Earth's core, the crust, is cracked all the way around.
Yeah.
The Ring of Fire. There's hundreds of volcanoes, earthquakes going on literally every minute. We should worry about that.
I find it a bit humorous, and I don't want to get into a climate change discussion here at this point, but I find it humorous when, we have some of these people screaming about this, and I keep thinking to myself, all the Earth has to do is hiccup, and we're all dead. Yeah. And we're dead.
Yeah. For all we know, mountains can be formed in a matter of hours. If there's a great upheaval, massive earthquakes, maybe beyond 9, 12, or 15, or 20 on the Richter scale, that you're talking about chunks of land just shooting up 50 feet into the air, or 20 feet or whatever, like that one that happened under the sea near Japan. That was a big shove up, and that made a tremendous tidal wave.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if we get something that's 20 or 30 times that, we're talking about, whole states breaking off and falling into the ocean. We don't know that the Earth isn't capable of that. There is some information that very early in our country, in the center of the United States, there was a magnitude 12 earthquake. It leveled everything that was there. Wasn't much there. We're talking over 200 years ago when this happened. But that's, nobody alive has seen anything close to that.
Right.
The Earth is capable of doing that, and maybe worse. Yellowstone, if that thing erupts, you'll have a 25-mile-wide volcano spewing enough ash into the air. Forget global warming. We're going to have severe global cooling if that goes off.
Yep.
And we're going to lose millions of lives. And, farm production is going to drop. People are going to starve. There's a lot of things that could go wrong.
And everything that you've described as a possibility has happened at some point, most likely, and in many cases, many times, in the 4 billion years of the Earth's existence. I mean, it's for people to make these observations and decisions based on their narrow view of what they've seen in their lifetime, or maybe they go back 100 years and suggest that tells them everything they need to know about what's happening around them, is so naive. And I just repeat it over and over again.
Yes. I agree. It is true. We're worrying about a lot of stuff. Yeah, we need to take care of this planet. I do agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be responsible. Stop throwing plastic into the ocean.
Right.
And all these things that we're doing as people who are very materialistic and don't give a damn about their environment or anybody else. We need to raise that consciousness so that we care about this. If we don't, the planet itself is going to do something as a response to ignore the cosmic ramifications of doing great harm. You put out an energy that's basically going to be disruptive, and in response to that, some natural disaster occurs, and it cleans up the mess itself. And that may happen if we don't get our act together here eventually. So, hey, I'm saying let's start thinking about what we can do to make this world better. Definitely we need to do that, but
and of course,
not all convinced about the global warming as being caused by greenhouse gases. I do believe mankind is the problem, but I believe it's in the structures we're building and creating, and we're causing a lot of heat to build up at the surface and convert it from radiant energy to convection energy, and it's stored when it does that. It takes a lot longer to dissipate, and that's what we see at the Earth's surface is heating up. But at higher altitudes, it's actually a little cooler than normal. But right here at the surface, it's heating up, and that's mankind is doing that. And I have solutions, and I have one in the book that I propose, but it's pretty radical. But there's other things we could do, but I don't know.
I want to ask you about something that is often referred to in anybody's kitchen table conversation about science fiction and the future and technology. We look at Star Trek as being an innovative television program in a series of films that's demonstrated a lot of technology, and we often say, will we realize some of this technology as time moves forward? And I think we have realized a bunch of this technology already, but one of the big ones is the transporter idea. Is that something that factors into any of these things that we've been talking about?
I have been doing some study on the aliens, their teleportation or transporter technology. It's not like Star Trek's. I see that as highly inefficient way to to move people from one spot to the other. According to some of the abductees that I've talked to, it's very different. It's hard to reverse engineer. It's like there's this tube that they can step into, and it feels velvety. It's almost like there's a fluid made of some sort of force field, and it's controlled, this teleportation or this transporter technology, by thought. So you step into it and you arrive at a different part of the ship. There's no doors sliding open and closed or anything like on Star Trek. You step on into this tube, and it's got this blue and white light, and then you're moved to another location. And they use this beam to lift people up from the bottom of the ship. So it's probably using some sort of magnetic technology. But beyond that, I'm not sure what, but it's very different. The other way to transport great distances is using a Stargate, where you open portals into different realms, different dimensions, and different places in space and time. That uses a much more radical technology that I describe in the Stargate chapter of my book. It's the last chapter or the second to the last chapter. And that's a different kind of technology, and I believe we have that as well already.
I often think about, it's a bit scary, but there's more and more talk about this idea that we can take our consciousness and put it into digital form, put it on a computer, and live forever in that form, even though our physical body dies. If you take that same concept and you say, okay, if I can take my consciousness and load it onto something digitally and then send that across the world, let's just use our Earth as an example, but send it to the other side of the world, even put it into some type of robotic apparatus, let it wander around. Let's say I wanted to go to Rome, Italy. Put it into a robot. The robot wanders around Rome with my consciousness, comes back. My consciousness comes back to my body. Who's to say I wasn't there?
Consciousness, as it is in our form in our body, that's controlled by God, basically, all across the entire universe. I have heard tell that in some limited circumstances that very advanced alien technology somehow is able to do a transfer of consciousness, but that's got to be with higher form, since they have such great spiritual connection and psychic ability. Somehow they work out some sort of an arrangement where they can do this as well. But for the most part, when we're born, our consciousness passes from the spirit realm into our body and binds to the flesh, mainly the brain, which the brain is not our consciousness. It's an interface to the material realm, and in that it processes your vision and sound and all these other things and makes those things available to our consciousness that resides within the brain. It's a miraculous thing.
All right, let me use a different word then. Let me use the word awareness. Let's say our consciousness remains with our body, yet somehow our awareness can be projected through digital means to a different location and can experience all the things of that location, and then it comes back to our brain and is processed there within our consciousness. Is that the same as transportation, being transported?
That's close, but what you've done, or what you're describing, is an extension of your brain, an interface.
Right.
And somehow, which would be an incredibly advanced technology, that the human being would have to have strong psychic abilities, and it's possible so that you pass a pattern that what you'd call consciousness or awareness to this device, and that pattern then behaves as you would behave. It acquires experiences through its sensors and whatever, and then that comes back to you. I think that's a possible technology. Not in our time, maybe, but maybe 1,000,000 years from now or 10,000 years from now, maybe we can do that. But there's a lot of stuff that's got to go on. You have to have an interface that is psychic abilities interface, which aliens have. They steer their ships psychically and do all kinds of things with thought. And we've even done those little experiments now with the Air Force flying some of our aircraft just with thought. They have a special helmet and so forth. But you have to be very disciplined to make that work. If you have a stray thought in the middle of flying a jet, that could be catastrophic.
Right.
So we're only in the infancy of that kind of technology. But yeah, what you're describing, I think, is theoretically possible.
I just think we often find ourselves kind of thinking in a box here when we think about teleportation as being, especially when in the Star Trek version of all of this, our molecules come apart. Those molecules are somehow sent across space and they reform, and you're physically there. And when we're thinking in that trap, we're not thinking about the idea. Really, it's the sensory part of being in a place that's the important part, and you might be able to accomplish this teleportation in that manner, not necessarily a physical teleportation. But again, this is my small brain trying to process this stuff, so I don't know if it makes any sense or not.
Well, I liken that to like a kind of a facsimile technology that physically faxes you from one place to another.
Yeah.
The computing power would be all the computing power on Earth and then some, just to pull off that trick. There's just better ways to do it where you just take the body in whole and either go intradimensional or use this other technique that I described in the Stargate technology is essentially a teleportation device, except it opens portals and the whole body steps through from one place to the other.
Yeah.
Way more efficient.
Sounds like
less computing power.
It sounds like it would be. Leave it to me to complicate it. All right. It's amazing how quickly an hour goes, and there's only a little bit of smoke coming out of my ears. So once again, Mark, you've done a terrific job of keeping it, talking about these ideas in a way that I can understand them. Where can people get the book, and how soon do you expect the second book to be released?
Well, I'm making good progress. I'm in the third chapter already, so maybe a little over a year, because I'm a pretty slow writer. And I go over things like 10 times, so at least a year from now. And my website is www.super-relativity.com, super-relativity.com. And you got links right on the front page to do the main things that you would do if you want to go to my site. Like buy the book. You could buy it on the site, or you could go to Amazon and buy it. Or you could, look at my blog and some of the shows I've been on and some stuff like that. It's all right there on the front page.
Terrific. Mark, thanks again for being here. Love having you on the show. Look forward to bringing you back. I don't know if we have to wait until the next book, but certainly by the time the next book comes out.
Sure, definitely.
Beyond Reality Paranormal is hosted by J.V. Johnson and produced by Orion Palmer and Slick Eddie Edwards. Like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Please consider supporting the program either through your podcast platform, click on the link in the description, or on Patreon at Joha Productions. If you'd like to be a guest on Beyond Reality Paranormal, or you have a recommendation for a guest, contact our producer, Slick Eddie Edwards. Eddie is spelled with a Y at slickeddieedwards@gmail.com.